I don't see a future with you, she said after 8 months of me planning her vacations and paying her bills. The words hit me like a sledgehammer while I sat across from Isabella at Romano's, the expensive steakhouse where I'd just dropped $180 on dinner she barely touched. I'd been planning this evening for weeks, thinking we might finally talk about moving in together officially, maybe even discuss engagement timelines. Instead, she was ending us between bites of Wagyu beef I couldn't really afford but ordered anyway because she'd mentioned wanting to try it. I stared at her perfect manicured nails wrapped around the wine glass I'd paid for, thinking about the $800 I'd transferred to her account that morning when her credit card got declined at the spa. Temporary cash flow issue, she'd texted frantically while I was in a client meeting. It was always temporary with Isabella. 8 months of temporary unemployment after she quit her retail job to focus on her art, though I'd never seen her create anything beyond Instagram posts about her artistic journey. 8 months of me covering her $1,400 rent, her $350 car payment, groceries, dinners, weekend getaways to wine country that she planned and I funded. You're too practical, Cameron, she continued, swirling her Pinot Noir like she was delivering profound wisdom. Too boring. I need someone who inspires my creativity, who understands my artistic soul. I almost laughed at the irony. She was criticizing my lack of spontaneity while sitting in a restaurant I'd booked last minute because she wanted to do something fun on a Tuesday night. Every spontaneous adventure she'd had in the past 8 months had been funded by my supposedly boring financial analyst salary. What about all the plans we made? I asked, thinking about the Napa Valley photography workshop I'd already put a deposit on for her birthday next month. The trip to Europe you wanted to take? Her face brightened momentarily. Oh, about that workshop, could you still cover it? I mean, I already told them I was coming, and Felix thinks it would be amazing for my portfolio. Felix, the sculptor she'd been mentioning more frequently lately, the one who lived in his parents' garage and made meaningful art from recycled materials. The one who apparently understood her artistic soul better than the guy paying her bills. I watched her finish the last of her wine and signal the waiter for another glass, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd just asked her soon-to-be ex-boyfriend to fund her artistic development with another man. Isabella, you do realize what you're asking, right? She looked genuinely confused. We're friends, aren't we? Friends help each other out. Besides, you make good money now, especially after your promotion. It's not like it would hurt you financially. Not hurt me financially. I'd been tracking every expense for months, watching my savings account drain while she pursued her dreams on my dime. The promotion she mentioned had been my proudest professional moment, and she'd celebrated by immediately calculating how the salary increase could benefit her creative pursuits. That's when it finally clicked. I wasn't her boyfriend. I was her personal investment fund with dating privileges. For 8 months, I'd been subsidizing someone who saw me as a walking ATM rather than a romantic partner. Someone who could dismiss our entire relationship while casually requesting continued financial support in the same conversation. Check, please, I said quietly, already reaching for my wallet one last time. The next morning, I sat in my home office with my laptop open, doing what I do best, analyzing data. Except this time, the spreadsheet wasn't for a client's portfolio. It was 8 months of financial records documenting exactly how I'd funded Isabella's lifestyle while she treated our relationship like her personal venture capital firm. The numbers were brutal: $1,400 monthly rent assistance, $400 in groceries she never offered to split, $200 weekly dinners at restaurants she chose, 3 weekend trips totaling $2,800 that she planned and I paid for. Even her daily $7 lattes from the coffee shop near her apartment had somehow become my responsibility. I scrolled through my bank statements, remembering how it started. Small things at first: she'd forgotten her wallet on our 3rd date, needed help with a surprise car repair, had a rough month when her retail hours got cut. I'd been happy to help because that's what caring partners do. But Isabella had transformed temporary assistance into permanent financial arrangement without either of us acknowledging the shift. By month 4, she wasn't even pretending to reach for her purse anymore. The pattern was clear in the data. Every time I got a raise or bonus, Isabella's expenses mysteriously increased. When I mentioned my promotion to senior analyst at dinner last month, she'd barely congratulated me before launching into her business idea, a lifestyle blog about authentic travel experiences funded by someone else's income. She'd spent the entire evening detailing camera equipment she needed, locations she wanted to visit, and how my increased salary could make her dreams possible. My actual achievement, the culmination of 2 years of 60-hour weeks and professional development, became a footnote to her creative ambitions. "This could be huge for us," she'd said, outlining her content strategy while I picked at my overpriced pasta. "I mean, you're so good with money and planning. You could handle the business side while I focus on the creative content." The business side. She meant I'd fund her Instagram hobby while she took credit for the lifestyle my income provided. I'd watched my friends exchange uncomfortable glances as Isabella casually discussed our financial future in terms that exclusively benefited her. The most painful part wasn't the money. I made decent income as a senior analyst and could technically afford her expenses. It was the complete absence of gratitude or recognition. Isabella never thanked me for covering her rent or planning elaborate weekends away. She never acknowledged the sacrifice I was making or offered to contribute in other ways. Instead, she developed this entitled expectation that I'd handle everything financial while she pursued her artistic dreams. When her credit card got declined at expensive stores, she'd call me with frustrated urgency, like I was personally failing her by not having already anticipated the expense. Looking at the spreadsheet, I calculated I'd spent over $12,000 in 8 months subsidizing someone who ultimately saw me as too boring for a future together. Someone who could criticize my practicality while living off the income that practicality generated. The irony was suffocating. She wanted spontaneity and creativity from someone whose financial stability made her spontaneous lifestyle possible. Isabella had constructed the perfect setup. A boyfriend who funded her dreams while she searched for someone more exciting to actually build a life with. I closed the laptop and made a decision that felt like exhaling after holding my breath for months. Isabella wanted someone who inspired her creativity? She was welcome to find him, but she'd have to do it on her own dime. 2 days later, Isabella suggested we meet at Café Luna to talk things through properly. I agreed, though I suspected she'd chosen our usual spot strategically, the place where I'd been buying her daily $7 oat milk lattes for months, where the baristas knew her order by heart because I'd programmed it into my routine. I arrived first and ordered my regular black coffee, pointedly skipping her usual drink order that had become muscle memory. She walked in 20 minutes late, looking perfectly composed in the designer dress I'd helped her afford during our 3rd month together. "Cameron, I'm so glad you wanted to meet," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other night, and I think I was just overwhelmed. You know how I get when I'm stressed about my career." I watched her glance toward the counter expectantly, waiting for me to ask what she wanted to drink. When I didn't move, she hesitated for a moment before continuing. "The thing is, I do care about you. A lot. But I need someone who inspires my creativity, who understands that artists need emotional and spiritual connection to thrive." She paused, studying my face. "Felix gets that part of me. He sees my potential." "What about the workshop in Napa?" I asked. "The one I put a $500 deposit on for your birthday?" Her face brightened immediately. "Oh my God, yes. Felix thinks it would be incredible for my portfolio. He said the connections I could make there might lead to gallery opportunities. You're still planning to cover that, right? I mean, you already committed to it." I almost admired the audacity. She was breaking up with me while simultaneously requesting continued financial support for activities with another man. "Isabella, let me make sure I understand this correctly. You want to end our romantic relationship so you can explore things with Felix, but you'd like me to continue funding your artistic development." She looked genuinely confused by my tone. "We're friends, aren't we? Good friends help each other out. Besides, it's not like the money means the same thing to you that it does to me. You're stable, you've got a good career. This workshop could change my entire life trajectory. And what exactly have you contributed to our friendship over the past 8 months?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She sat quietly for a moment, probably running through memories of our relationship, searching for examples of reciprocity. "I've been supportive of your career," she said finally. "I listen when you talk about work stuff, even though it's pretty boring. And I've brought creativity into your life. Before me, you just worked and went home. I showed you how to live a little. Live a little. With my money, at restaurants I couldn't afford, on trips I planned but she enjoyed. Isabella, do you remember ever paying for anything? Dinner, groceries, gas for the trips you planned?" "That's not fair," she said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "You know my situation. I've been between jobs, focusing on building my artistic portfolio. Those aren't things that generate immediate income. I've been investing in my future. With my income. Our relationship expenses were mutual investments in our shared experiences," she said, as if she'd rehearsed the line. "I never asked you to pay for anything you didn't want to do. If you felt burdened by the financial arrangement, you should have said something." I stared at her, realizing she'd actually convinced herself that my financial support had been voluntary gifts rather than relationship contributions. In her mind, she'd been doing me a favor by allowing me to fund her lifestyle, and I was being unreasonable by connecting her expenses to romantic obligation. "So to be clear," I said slowly, "you want to pursue Felix romantically while I continue supporting you financially as a friend. Why does everything have to be so transactional with you?" she asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "Can't you just be happy that I'm finding myself artistically? Felix believes in my talent. He thinks I could really make it as a photographer if I had the right opportunities." I stood up and pulled out my wallet, leaving exact change for my coffee on the table. "Good luck with Felix," I said. "I hope he's as supportive of your dreams as you think he'll be." As I walked toward the door, she called after me, "Cameron, wait. We haven't finished talking about the workshop deposit." I didn't turn around. The first text came 3 hours later. "Cameron, I think we had a miscommunication. Can we please talk about this like adults?" I deleted it without responding. Then came the follow-ups. "I'm confused about why you're being so cold. This isn't like you to just shut down communication. My rent is due tomorrow and my account is short $400. I spent that evening systematically dismantling our financial entanglement. Removed her from my car insurance, canceled the joint streaming accounts she'd insisted we share, but never contributed to, changed my banking passwords, and blocked her number on everything. Each action felt like removing weight from my shoulders. For the first time in 8 months, I went to bed without mentally calculating upcoming expenses or checking my account balance for unauthorized charges. The next morning brought a call from our mutual friend Derek. "Dude, Isabella's freaking out. She says you've gone completely silent and she needs to talk to you about some workshop thing?" I could hear the confusion in his voice. Derek was a good guy, but he'd never seen the financial dynamics of our relationship up close. "She wants me to fund a photography workshop she's taking with her new boyfriend," I said simply. "Wait, what? New boyfriend? I thought you guys were working things out." "Apparently she doesn't see a future with me, but she'd like me to continue paying for hers." Derek was quiet for a moment. "That's actually insane. She's really asking you to pay for stuff while she dates someone else. Along with rent assistance, since her account is short this month. Bro, that's not a relationship. That's a subscription service." By day 3, Isabella had enlisted Derek as a messenger, sending increasingly desperate requests through him. "She says you promised to support her dreams and you can't just abandon her mid-pursuit," Derek reported with obvious discomfort. "She's claiming you made some kind of commitment to fund her artistic development." I forwarded Derek screenshots of my bank statements showing $12,247 in transfers to Isabella over 8 months, along with her recent texts demanding money for the workshop with Felix. "Ask her to show you what she's contributed to our shared expenses," I told him. "I'll wait." Derek called back an hour later. "Holy shit, Cameron. I had no idea it was this bad. She couldn't name a single thing she'd paid for. Not one dinner, not one grocery run, nothing. And when I asked about her contribution to the relationship, she said she brought creativity and spontaneity to your boring life." Dude, she actually said that. The silence that followed was profound. No more frantic texts, no more emergency financial requests, no more guilt trips about abandoning her dreams. For the first time since we'd started dating, my phone wasn't buzzing with Isabella's latest crisis requiring immediate monetary solutions. I realized I'd been living in a constant state of low-level anxiety, always waiting for the next expense, the next urgent transfer, the next financial emergency that somehow always coincided with something she wanted to buy. My bank account started growing again. Not just from avoiding Isabella's expenses, but because I wasn't constantly monitoring and redistributing my income to fund someone else's lifestyle. I could buy groceries without calculating whether I'd have enough left for her rent assistance. I could consider purchases for myself without first ensuring Isabella's expenses were covered. The mental space that had been occupied by financial stress and resentment began filling with actual peace. 2 weeks later, Derek mentioned that Isabella had moved back in with her roommate Ashley, and that Felix had turned out to be less financially supportive than she'd expected. Apparently he thinks artists should support each other emotionally rather than financially, Derek said with barely contained amusement. She's working at some retail job again, and Ashley's getting tired of covering her share of expenses when Isabella comes up short. I felt a moment of satisfaction, not from Isabella's struggles, but from the validation that I'd been right about her expectations. She hadn't wanted a partner, she'd wanted a patron. Someone to fund her lifestyle while she pursued whatever seemed more exciting in the moment. The difference was that patrons usually get their names on plaques, and I'd gotten nothing but criticism for being too practical while literally making her impractical lifestyle possible. The workshop deposit was automatically forfeited when she couldn't cover the remaining balance. $500 I'd never see again, but honestly, it was the cheapest education I'd ever received about recognizing financial parasites disguised as romantic partners. 3 months later, I was at Derek's barbecue when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned to find Victoria, Isabella's younger sister, holding 2 beers and looking slightly nervous. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, gesturing to the empty spot on the deck railing beside me. "I promise I'm not here as Isabella's ambassador." I'd met Victoria briefly during Isabella's birthday dinner last year, but we'd barely spoken beyond polite introductions. Where Isabella was all dramatic gestures and expensive tastes, Victoria seemed grounded and practical. She worked as a dental hygienist, drove a modest Honda, and had always struck me as the responsible one in their family. "Actually, I wanted to apologize," she said, handing me a beer. "For Isabella's behavior. I know what she did to you wasn't right. You don't need to apologize for your sister's choices." "Maybe not, but I watched it happen and didn't say anything. Isabella's always been like this, finds guys who'll take care of her financially while she figures herself out. Our parents enabled it for years, always bailing her out when her grand plans fell through." Victoria took a sip of her beer. "They used to ask about you all the time. Mom especially liked you. She kept saying you seemed like the kind of man who actually showed up when he said he would." We talked for an hour about work, travel, normal conversation that didn't revolve around emergency expenses or artistic dreams requiring immediate funding. When Victoria suggested grabbing dinner sometime, I found myself saying yes without the mental calculation of potential costs that had become automatic with Isabella. Our first date was at a mid-range Italian place Victoria had suggested. When the check came, she immediately pulled out her phone calculator and started dividing the total. "Okay, so with tip, that's $47.50 each," she said, counting out exact change. The gesture moved me more than any grand romantic display ever could. Here was someone who understood that adult relationships involved mutual contribution, not one-sided financial dependency. "You know," Victoria said as we walked to our cars, "Isabella used to complain that you were too focused on money. But watching what she put you through, I think you were just trying to build something stable with someone who didn't value stability." Over the next month, Victoria and I fell into an easy routine of splitting everything equally. Movie tickets, dinners, gas for weekend trips we planned together. She insisted on alternating who paid for coffee dates, kept careful track of shared expenses, and never once suggested I cover something because I made more money. The relief of dating someone who saw financial partnership as basic adult behavior rather than optional contribution was immense. Meanwhile, Derek kept me updated on Isabella's situation through mutual friends. Felix had turned out to be exactly what you'd expect from a sculptor living in his parents' garage: lots of artistic passion, zero financial stability. Apparently he expects her to contribute equally to their creative partnership, Derek reported with obvious amusement. Isabella's learning what it's like when someone expects her to fund shared experiences. She'd burned through her savings within 6 weeks and was back to working retail, picking up extra shifts to cover basic expenses Felix couldn't help with. The lifestyle blog had never materialized beyond a few Instagram posts about authentic living that gained minimal traction without the funded travel content she'd originally planned. "My mom feels terrible about Isabella," Victoria told me one evening as we cooked dinner together, each having contributed ingredients. "She keeps talking about how she should have raised her to be more self-sufficient. And she asks about you constantly, wants to know if you're seeing anyone, if you're happy." Victoria paused, looking slightly embarrassed. "Actually, she's been hoping we'd connect since January. She thinks we're much better matched than you and Isabella ever were." The irony wasn't lost on me. While Isabella had been treating me like her personal ATM, her own family had been watching the dynamic with disapproval and hoping I'd end up with the daughter who actually understood partnership. Victoria showed me screenshots of their family group chat from months earlier, where their mother had written, "That Cameron is such a nice boy. I wish Isabella appreciated him more. He's exactly the type Victoria should meet." Looking back, the signs had been obvious to everyone except me. I'd been so focused on trying to make things work with Isabella that I'd missed the clear indication from her own family that they didn't approve of how she treated me. They'd seen what I'd been too close to recognize, that I deserved someone who contributed rather than just consumed, someone who saw love as partnership rather than sponsorship. The confrontation I'd been unconsciously dreading happened at Derek's housewarming party 6 months later. Victoria and I were discussing weekend plans when I spotted Isabella across the room, looking thinner than I remembered and wearing an outfit I didn't recognize, probably because she'd had to buy it herself. She saw us together and her face went through a progression of emotions: confusion, recognition, and finally something that looked like betrayal. She waited until Victoria went to the bathroom before approaching me. "Cameron," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "I didn't expect to see you here. With my sister." The last part carried an accusation, like I'd violated some unspoken boundary by moving on with someone she knew. "Isabella," I replied neutrally. "How are things with Felix?" Her composure cracked slightly. "Felix and I aren't together anymore. He turned out to be financially irresponsible. He expected me to cover everything while he focused on his art." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife, but Isabella seemed genuinely oblivious to the parallel. "I'm actually glad I ran into you. I've been wanting to talk." "About what?" "About us. About how things ended. I think I made a mistake." She glanced toward the bathroom where Victoria had disappeared. "I mean, what we had was real. We have history together. 3 years of shared experiences. Shared experiences that I funded while you criticized me for being too practical." "I was confused about what I wanted," she continued, ignoring my comment. "But I've learned a lot about myself since then. About what really matters in a relationship. I think we could try again, if you're willing to forgive me." Before I could respond, Victoria returned with 3 drinks balanced in her hands. "I brought you both something," she said cheerfully, handing Isabella a beer before sliding naturally beside me. "It's so nice to see you, Izzy. How's the photography going?" Isabella's smile looked painful. "It's a work in progress. I see you're wearing new earrings. They're beautiful." Her tone suggested she recognized them as similar to ones she'd hinted I should buy her months ago. "Thank you," Victoria said, touching the small pearl studs unconsciously. "Cameron surprised me with them last week, but I'm getting dinner next time. We have this system where we alternate big purchases." I watched Isabella process this information, that Victoria and I had a system for shared expenses, that Victoria insisted on reciprocating gestures rather than just receiving them. Everything Isabella had rejected about equal partnership was exactly what Victoria embraced and insisted upon. "That's very organized," Isabella said weakly. "It works for us, I said. Victoria actually pays her own bills. The comment hit exactly as intended. Isabella flinched visibly, her composure finally cracking completely. Could I talk to you privately for a minute? She asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Victoria squeezed my arm gently. I'll be right over there, she said, giving me permission to handle whatever Isabella needed to say. This is insane, Isabella said the moment we were alone. You can't seriously be dating my sister. After everything we meant to each other? What exactly did we mean to each other, Isabella? Because looking back, I was your financial support system and you were someone passing time until something better came along. That's not fair. I cared about you. You cared about what I provided. There's a difference. She was crying now, but quietly, trying not to make a scene. I know I made mistakes. I know I took you for granted. But I was young and stupid and scared of commitment. I see now that what we had was special. What we had was me paying for everything while you complained that I wasn't exciting enough for a future together. You ended it, Isabella. You chose Felix over me because he inspired your creativity. And I was wrong. Felix was a disaster. He had no ambition, no stability, no ability to plan for the future. Nothing like you. She wiped her eyes carefully, trying not to smudge her makeup. I need you to understand, you were the best thing in my life, and I threw it away because I was too immature to recognize it. I looked across the room where Victoria was laughing with Derek's girlfriend, completely comfortable in her own skin, never performing or calculating angles. Maybe, I said, but I'm not that person anymore. I'm with someone who sees me as a partner, not a provider. She's my sister, Isabella said desperately. This is going to destroy our family. Your family's been hoping we'd get together since January. Your mom told Victoria she thought we were better matched than you and I ever were. The words hit her like a physical blow. Isabella stared at me, probably realizing that her own family had been quietly rooting against our relationship while openly hoping I'd connect with Victoria. The rejection wasn't just romantic, it was familial validation that she'd been the problem all along. 6 months later, Victoria and I got engaged. Nothing dramatic, just us at home after dinner, talking about the house we wanted to buy together, the equal down payment we'd both been saving for, the future we were building as actual partners. When I proposed, she immediately started calculating how we'd split wedding expenses, which made me laugh so hard I almost dropped the ring. We posted one simple photo on social media, her hand with the ring, captioned, "Building something beautiful together." Isabella's response came within hours, not congratulations, but a flood of novel-length text messages to my old number that I'd forgotten to block. Messages about finding herself, about realizing I was her soulmate all along, about how Felix had taught her to value real partnership. I could have deleted them, but something made me screenshot the most desperate ones and forward them to Victoria's mom Patricia instead. Patricia's response was immediate and illuminating. Screenshots of family group chats dating back to January, conversations I'd never seen where the entire family had been discussing setting me up with Victoria. "We've been hoping for this since Christmas," one message read. Isabella never deserved Cameron, but Victoria would appreciate him. Another from their father, "That boy deserves someone who contributes instead of just consumes." The final confrontation happened at the grocery store 2 weeks later. Victoria and I were shopping for dinner ingredients when Isabella cornered us in the cereal aisle, looking more desperate than I'd ever seen her. "Cameron, please," she said, ignoring Victoria completely. "I know you got my messages. I know you still care about me." "I didn't get any messages," I said honestly. "I blocked your number months ago." Her face went pale. "But I've been texting you for weeks. About how sorry I am, how much I've learned about myself, how Felix taught me to value real partnership." "You've been texting my old number," I realized. "I changed it when we got engaged." Victoria stepped closer, her cart full of groceries we'd selected and would split the cost of equally. "Isabella, you need to stop this. Cameron and I are getting married. We're building a life together. A life that should have been mine." Isabella's voice cracked. "I made a mistake, okay? Felix was a disaster. He expected me to pay for everything while he sat around making sculptures out of garbage. I couldn't even afford groceries toward the end because he kept borrowing money for art supplies. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. Isabella had finally experienced what I'd lived through, supporting someone financially while receiving only criticism in return. But unlike me, she'd lasted 6 weeks instead of 8 months. I learned my lesson, she continued desperately. I know now what real partnership looks like. I'm ready to contribute equally, to split expenses, to be the girlfriend you always wanted me to be. Victoria and I exchanged glances. Isabella, I said gently, that's exactly what Victoria and I already have. We don't need to learn how to be partners, we just are. But I could change. I have changed. I'm working full-time now, paying my own rent, buying my own groceries. I'm exactly what you wanted. You're what you should have been all along, Victoria said quietly. But Cameron doesn't need someone who learned to be responsible out of desperation. He needs someone who was responsible from the beginning. Isabella's composure finally shattered completely. This isn't fair, she sobbed. You're my sister. You knew how I felt about him. You knew I still loved him. I knew you still needed him, Victoria corrected. There's a difference. As Isabella broke down between the Cheerios and cornflakes, Victoria and I simply walked away, our cart full of shared groceries for a dinner we'd cooked together in the house we were buying with money we'd both saved. We left Isabella to face what I'd faced 8 months earlier, the reality that treating love like a business transaction where you contribute nothing but expect everything has consequences. The last I heard, Isabella had moved to a different city, finally forced to build a life on her own terms rather than someone else's income. I genuinely hoped she'd learn something from the experience, that she'd find someone who wanted what she was actually offering rather than what she needed them to provide. But honestly, I didn't think about her much anymore. When you're with the right person, someone who sees partnership as shared contribution rather than personal entitlement, the past stops haunting you. Victoria and I were too busy building something real together, something based on equality instead of dependency, on what we could create together rather than what one person could take from the other. And for the first time in my adult life, love felt like addition instead of subtraction.